alleged ties to Saddam Hussein. The committee, led by Senator Coleman of Minnesota, alleges that he received oil from the Iraqi government for his opposition to UN sanctions against Iraq. The committee is investigating allegations of corruption in the UN's Oil for Food program. Here is Tuesday's testimony by Mr. Galloway. It lasts about 45 minutes.
Mr. Galloway, I'm pleased to have you before the committee today. What I'm going to do is briefly summarize the evidence before I give you a chance to give your sworn testimony. The Oil for Food program was used to support those who were favorable to Iraq. Former Iraqi Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz and Iraqi Vice President Taha Yassin Ramadan confirmed this. I would think that you would admit that your efforts to oppose the sanction were well received by the regime. I know it's been quoted to you many, many times, but your, I would say, infamous statement to Saddam Hussein on January 21st, 1994, where you said to Saddam, Your Excellency, Mr. President, I greet you in the name of many thousands of people in Britain who stood against the tide and opposed the war and aggression against Iraq, and continue to oppose the war by economic means, which is aimed to strangle the life out of the great people of Iraq. You then went on to say he greets you in the name of the Palestinian people. You went on to note that I thought the President would appreciate knowing that even today, 3 years after the war, I still meet with families who are calling their newborn son Saddam. You went on, ultimately, at the very end, to say, Sir, I salute your courage, your strength, your indefatigability, and I want you to know that we are with you, and I believe it was in Arabic, Hatta al-Nasr, Hatta al-Nasr, Hatta al-Quds, which means until victory in Jerusalem. And I also would note that you have stated that you deeply regret those comments and that the comments were not aimed directly at Saddam, but they were aimed at the Iraqi people. In the fall of 1999, you headed a 2-month London to Baghdad bus trip to gain support for lifting the sanctions on Iraq. We have your name on Iraqi documents, some prepared before the fall of Saddam, some after, that identify you as one of the allocation holders, that your allocations were then used by Fawaz Zurakat operations operating under the name of Iridium Petroleum and the Middle East Advanced Semiconductor to actually lift the oil. We know, too, based on the statements of former Iraqi officials as well as some documents, and in the cases of Vladimir Zhirinovsky and Alexander Volshin, correspondence and documents, that allocation holders knew that surcharges or oil allocations were paid to Saddam Hussein, and that allocation holders were aware of this and responsible for the payments. We have also heard testimony regarding several documents retrieved from the Iraqi Ministry of Oil that demonstrate how Iraq allocated oil to its friends and allies. Exhibit 13, which you've seen, displayed a SOMO chart that demonstrated Vladimir Zhirinovsky's dealing with Machino Import in Phase 11. That chart also lists contract M1104 with Middle East Advanced Semiconductor. Footnote 93, her testimony regarding a SOMO commercial invoice dated June 27, 2002 that shows Middle East Semiconductor loaded 2,360,860 barrels of Iraqi crude oil pursuant to SOMO crude oil sales contract M1104. Exhibit 12, we heard testimony regarding correspondence from the executive director of SOMO to the Iraqi oil minister providing details of contract M1104 and listing your name in parentheses next to Middle East Advanced Semiconductor and Fawaz Zurakat, who we know lifted the oil. Again, statements of detainees, including former Vice President Ramadan, confirmed that the name in parentheses, your name, is the allocation holder. We heard testimony regarding contract M1104, which was signed on December 12, 2001 between SOMO and Fawaz Zurakat, president of Middle East Advanced Semiconductor. We heard testimony regarding a SOMO commercial invoice, B13201, that shows Iridium Petroleum lifted 1,014,403 barrels of Iraqi oil pursuant to SOMO crude oil sales contract M923. Exhibit 45, her testimony regarding a SOMO chart entitled Crude Oil Allocations during Phase 9 of the Memorandum of Understanding that indicates contract M923 was executed between SOMO and Mr. Fawaz Zurakat / George Galloway / Iridium Petroleum. Exhibit 9, we also heard testimony regarding a memo from the Executive Director of SOMO to the Oil Minister requesting approval of contract M923. The document includes an official Ministry of Oil stamp dated 1/15/2001 and provides details of the contract M923 signed with the Iridium Petroleum Company, parens, Fawaz Zurakat - Miriam's Appeal, indicating that the allocation recipient for contract M923 was Fawaz Zurakat, Miriam's Appeal. Mr. Galloway, as I indicated in my opening statement, this is not a court of law. This committee has simply made available information obtained during the investigation from interviews of former Iraqi officials, as well as Iraqi documents that lay out how the Oil for Food program worked, how allocations were given to favored friends, how allocation holders made substantial commissions selling those allocations to oil companies, what Ramadan called compensation for support, what another official, when talking about another allocation holder, said, of course they made a profit, that's the whole point, how surcharges on oil contracts were given back to the Saddam regime and were the responsibility of the allocation holder. The evidence then clearly identifies you as an allocation beneficiary who transferred the allocations to Fawaz Zurkat, who became chairman of your organization, Miriam's Appeal. Senior Iraqi officials have confirmed that you, in fact, received oil allocations and that the documents that identify you as an allocation recipient are valid. If you can help provide any evidence that challenges the veracity of these documents or of the statements of former Iraqi officials, we'd welcome that input. Mr. Galloway, you're appearing before the subcommittee without asserting any privilege or immunity. Indeed, your appearance before the subcommittee is entirely voluntary and on your own accord. No subpoena was issued to secure your appearance. You're appearing before the subcommittee concerning matters that do not arise out of the performance of any of your official duties as a member of the British Parliament, but instead concern actions taken by you in your capacity as a private citizen. Before we begin, pursuant to Rule 6, all witnesses who testify before this subcommittee are required to be sworn. This time I would ask you to rise and please raise your right hand. You swear the testimony you're about to give before this subcommittee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. We will be using a timing system today, Mr. Galloway. We could have 10 minutes for opening statement. If you need more time, we'll certainly accommodate that, and you may proceed.
Senator, I am not now, nor have I ever been, an oil trader, and neither has anyone on my behalf. I have never seen a barrel of oil, owned one, bought one, sold one, and neither has anybody on my behalf. Now, I know that standards have slipped over the last few years in Washington, but for a lawyer, you're remarkably cavalier with any idea of justice. I'm here today, but last week, you already found me guilty. You traduced my name around the world without ever having asked me a single question, without ever having contacted me, without ever having written to me or telephoned me, without any contact with me whatsoever. And you call that justice. Now, I want to deal with the pages that relate to me in this dossier, and I want to point out areas where there are, let's be charitable and say, errors. And then I want to put this in the context that I believe it ought to be. On the very first page of your document about me, you assert that I have had many meetings with Saddam Hussein. This is false. I have had 2 meetings with Saddam Hussein, once in 1994 and once in August of 2002. By no stretch of the English language can that be described as many meetings with Saddam Hussein. As a matter of fact, I've met Saddam Hussein exactly the same number of times as Donald Rumsfeld met him. The difference is Donald Rumsfeld met him to sell him guns and to give him maps, the better to target those guns. I met him to try and bring about an end to sanctions, suffering, and war, and on the second of the 2 occasions, I met him to try and persuade him to allow Dr. Hans Blix and the United Nations weapons inspectors back into the country. A rather better use of 2 meetings with Saddam Hussein than your own Secretary of State for Defense made of his. In the same opening paragraph, you assert that I was an outspoken supporter of the Hussein regime. This is false. I have brought along here a dossier for all the members of your committee of statements by me as early as the 15th of March 1990,